Baltimore, and it's an early night if you like the Orioles early on. I mean, you can go to bed before Johnny Carson came on. They were up 7-1, coasting into a rather easy victory. And, it's nice to have Yovani Gallardo on the other side of an 11-3 victory for the Orioles. Luke Jones joins us now. He was at Ravens camp all day on Monday as the Ravens prepare for a trip down to Miami. We'll get to that in a moment, mixing a little baseball and football. First off, good day to you, Luke. These West Coast games, just one more, dude. One more, they get an afternoon, and then it's back to Camden Yards. And, hey, the Orioles doing everything they need to do to sort of flop around in this pennant race, including beating up on Yovani Gallardo and having Manny Machado continue to be kind of torrid since the month of August began.
No question about it. I like your use of the term flop around because that's really what all of these wild card teams are doing.
It's like the fish at the end of the Faith No More video, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and look, Anaheim's the latest team that's playing well, but, they're only a few games above 500. They had to win 6 straight to do that, and, Minnesota's been up and down, and Kansas City's been more down than up of late, but they've won 3 straight, and the Orioles still right in the thick of things, and we talked about this after the really disappointing weekend in Oakland that they need to win 2 out of 3. You'd love to sweep Seattle, and certainly the Mariners, a team that's lost 5 in a row, and a week ago we're looking like they might be the team that might be stepping forward. You want to continue that. It's not just winning for yourself, but you can hurt one of these other teams in the process. So a really nice win on Monday night. Tim Beckham gives them the early lead, and then the bottom of the first inning, it was looking like disaster. It was looking like bad Kevin Gausman had showed up. Beckham makes a throwing error, that just a bad mistake there, and you're thinking the floodgates could open very, very quickly.
Yeah, we were all wondering, like, why did Tampa give him away? And then, that's right. He's...
Yeah, and I even made the comment, he should remain the starting shortstop. That's a no-brainer segment, even when J.J. Hardy comes back here.
But don't expect your defense to be that good, right?
Well, and that's the thing. Plays like that aren't going to make Buck Showalter happy. And Beckham's defense has been solid overall. It's not as though he's been bad out there, but it looked like the floodgates were going to open. Think about it. They had second and third, nobody out, with Nelson Cruz, Seager, and Heredia coming up. And Gausman settles in, strikes out the American League's RBI leader, strikes out Seager, and before you know it, he was out of the inning without any more damage. So a really big night for Kevin Gausman. Got plenty of offense, of course, and as you said it, Manny Machado kind of being the one to pace that offense as he hits the grand slam in the second inning. And I would agree with your assessment. I think the Orioles much prefer facing Yovani Gallardo than they preferred having him pitch for their side. His velocity is actually better than it was a year ago, but he has not been effective, and kind of crazy to think that he has an ERA in the high 5s, 5.84, pitching half of his games at Safeco Field. That just speaks to someone who would have been even worse had he returned to the Orioles.
He feels to me to be a guy, though, that might be like Bartolo Colon, that can still pitch to a 5.5 ERA when he's 41, like literally, and I feel like he's the kind of guy that's not going to go away based on his reputation. Dude, I think the same thing about Jimenez. No matter what happens with Jimenez at the end of this year, he'll be on a roster somewhere next year. Someone, because he's got the stuff, and on any given night, he can go out there and get you into the 6th or 7th inning. But I've seen some bad pitching around here this year, and I know it's easy to kick him around on a night like tonight and say that. But his ERA's bordering 6. We missed nothing with him. And, back to Beckham and back to Duquette, because I want to give you a chance to stretch out on this a little bit, because I've talked to some other people. The savant in Duquette is that no matter what you think of him, and you're really down on him in July, and you're down on him in the offseason, and you're down on him because of Gallardo or Jimenez or any number of reasons you'd be down on him, and then he makes a deal, and Beckham comes in, and even Seth Smith could play a little bit. I mean, he does have some sort of dumpster dive savant in him, doesn't he? As a baseball evaluator, you could see how he's hung around the game for 25 years because every once in a while, the rabbit out of the hat, the Beckham, and there's some Travis Snyders in there as well. But, it's this month where the team's still hanging around where I don't know that he and Buck went into the old man and said, we need to stay in this, or whether the old man said, I don't quit on anything ever. I don't quit on, except on Aparicio's press pass. Anything else, all I can say is they're in the race, and it's the middle of the night, and we're watching, and as much as we don't think they're going to win the World Series, they get a check mark for this year for at least being competitive, even though the competitive nature of it is all these other teams stink. That's okay. The years when the Ravens make it at 9-7 into a playoff scenario and they go beat the Dolphins or whatever and make it into the second week, it's not a bad year. So, as we get up on Labor Day and as they come home here, and I'm assuming they'll come home and play well, right? But this is an interesting thing where the Ravens have now hit the skid, and they're trapped in the white water a little bit right now with the quarterback situation. The Orioles are a homestand away from maybe going 8-2 or 7-3 and making this thing interesting for themselves in September. So I tip my cap to them for that.
Yeah, and I think you have to. And getting back to your original point about Dan Duquette, look, I don't want to have a general manager who's only interested in high-profile, high-priced acquisitions. That's not the way to do business. Yes, have some of those, and you want to spend money, but we've seen this over and over that just spending money alone isn't the formula for putting together a winning product. You want to have some gumption to go out and make an unorthodox signing or find a diamond in the rough like a Miguel Gonzalez, for example. Those types of moves are necessary. And the interesting thing with the Beckham acquisition, and I said it the day that they made it, was this wasn't just a move for 2017. This is a guy who's under club control for a few more years. This is a cheap commodity. This is a former number one overall pick, and we've seen over the Dan Duquette era that he's acquired quite a few former first-round picks, many of them who flamed out and not even a case of a has-been, but was a never was. But in the case of Beckham, this was a guy who was drafted out of high school, clearly did not live up to expectations, had a couple drug suspensions in the minor leagues, definitely some questions about his dedication, things of that nature. That's why the Orioles were able to acquire him for a guy that was 18 years old and pitching at short season single-A Aberdeen. But you see the ability that he had kind of been trending upward over the last year or so in Tampa, and you roll the dice that maybe this is a renaissance for Tim Beckham. Maybe he finally does become the guy that everyone thought he could be when he was drafted back in 2008. And I don't think he's going to hit 500 the way he has for the Orioles over these last 2.5 weeks, but he's really provided a spark plug for them. There's no question about it. We see all these trade deadline moves, and it's funny, some of these teams that kind of went, maybe not all in, but certainly went in big to be buyers, some of them have struggled. And teams that maybe didn't do quite as much, like the Angels, for example, like the Orioles, who did something, but not anything really high-profile, you see how that's worked out for them. So, I think that's where you have to give Dan Duquette some credit. Small moves are okay. It's not, you're not just looking just to make the biggest signings and to make the biggest trades. It's a combination of high-profile moves and moves that are under the radar, and those under-the-radar moves have been some of Dan Duquette's best work. And it's funny. You mentioned the Seth Smith-Gallardo trade. Look at what the Orioles gave Seattle for Mark Trumbo, and it's just amazing to think and consider the Eric Bedard trade under Andy McPhail, and kind of crazy to think the Orioles have fleeced Seattle 3 different times like that.
Well, you think about Duquette, too, in the middle of a game. Every time Nelson Cruz comes to bat, you're like,
sure.
damn it. And then you're like, oh, yeah, they did bring him in, after the whole steroid thing and the PED thing and whatever. And he was pretty good around here for a little while. And you think, well, they did bring him in once. So, look, the Duquette thing, we're going to be able to measure that when it's all said and done, right? It's like, Kenny Rogers. When the dealing's done, we'll measure where Duquette was. on all of this stuff, but it's one more year they've stayed in a pennant race, and if that's your goal, okay. I mean, they're not going to win the World Series this year. I mean, I'd be willing to bet whatever on that, but and I don't think they're going to win the World Series next year, quite frankly, although, I want to see what the Yankees and the Red Sox do in the offseason, because I think that everything with them in my adulthood and in my 25 years on radio really is measuring them against the Yankees and the Red Sox, who are really, really serious about winning. And then there's the Orioles, who are, kind of hoping to win and kind of hoping to get to 500 sometimes and kind of hoping to be in a pennant race. I think there is a different level of expectation, as well as a different payroll, as well. I shouldn't say a different revenue stream, because the old man's had a hell of a revenue stream over the last 12 years and has made the team good enough. But, at some point you have to doff your cap to Duquette and say they're still in this thing. And it's not the work of Peter Angelos, I'll tell you that. It's the work of the baseball people around it. But the cupboard is bare. They have spent a lot of money win for win. They have wasted a lot of money. And, quite frankly, they're still not really good enough to win, to really win.
Well, and that's what remains to be seen. The cupboard's not completely bare. They have some assets. I think they're in a better position now than they were 2 years ago from that standpoint. Now, the pitching side of it, you can certainly express concern there, and until you see Hunter Harvey continue to work his way back, he's in the midst of a rehab assignment now, and has been some encouraging signs there. They drafted D.L. Hall. They have Sedlock, who's dealt with some health issues this year, but you still have high hopes for him. But on the flip side, Austin Hayes might be this team's starting right fielder next year. I've heard that from people in the organization. That's how impressive he is. They have Cedric Mullins. They have Chance Sisco, who should be at least in a timeshare as a starting catcher for them next year with Caleb Joseph. And you're hoping you don't have to bring back Wellington Castillo, quite frankly. But they do deserve credit. And look, that doesn't mean there aren't things that are messed up about the organization, and there aren't things that need to be improved. And certainly the farm system, certainly a come-to-Jesus moment on international spending that probably isn't going to come until Peter's no longer the one, as the primary owner. There are things that need to be improved, there's no doubt. But in the meantime, you have to acknowledge the fact that they have been as competitive as they've been since 2012, and they've had better records than the overall record than the Yankees and the Red Sox since the start of 2012. And have they gotten to the promised land? No. And ultimately, it's pass-fail from that standpoint. But I think you do also look at they have been consistently competitive. And 2015 is the only year where they didn't finish above 500. With understanding we don't know what's going to happen with the remainder of this season. But it's being competitive and being in the pennant race, even if you don't win it, sure beats the alternative of being 15 games under 500 at this point in the season and not having any hope whatsoever. And ultimately, I think as much as people complain about certain aspects of Dan Duquette, and clearly the relationship between he and Showalter has been less than harmonious at times, but they've made it work. And as crazy as this is to think about, for someone like me who was 2 weeks old the last time the Orioles won the World Series, this 5-year stretch, this current stretch they're on, is the most the most prolonged period of success they've had since 1983.
Dude, this might be as good as it gets. I mean, because it's certainly over the next 3 to 5 years, I don't think the success they've had, if your measuring bar is they're going to be in the race every year, they're going to run away with a division every 5 years, they're going to make it to the ALCS and get skunked, they're going to get by 1 year and choke 1 year, if that is what you think the next 5 years is going to be, I don't think it's going to be that, dude. And I would say the same thing for the Ravens to some degree with where Joe Flacco is and where the team is at this point in finding another quarterback if he can't be the quarterback over the next 5 years. The Patriots fans are going to have a real rude awakening when this wet dream is over with for them. But and I think the same thing could be said for the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Miami Heat or any of these other teams that have won. I mean, the Bulls are still trying to get back. The 49ers are still trying to figure out Joe Montana. Montana, that once you go through these periods of time after a Ray Lewis and an Ed Reed, there is, that solar eclipse comes along and it gets dark for a couple of minutes. And the Orioles, it feels like the lights are flickering. And, God bless them for keeping the lights flickering for 2 more weeks here in this particular season. But, they are alive. There's no point where I watch it and I look at the rest of these teams and I see the Kansas Cities and the Minnesotas and a team like Seattle that's allegedly in the way, that on the first night of the series with no pitching getting their ass kicked at home. I don't think the Orioles are going to get their ass kicked when they get home this weekend. I don't. They usually don't get their ass kicked at home. Matter of fact, they play 600 ball at home, right? Plus sometimes. So, I think when they get home this weekend, it becomes a pennant race. Now, I don't think everybody wakes up around here except to go get the next bobblehead they're giving away, because that's how ticket sales go. But as interest goes, as people are watching the games, as people start looking at games in September and saying, that game might mean something, I don't know that we sat around here in June and July thinking games in September would mean anything around here. So I do tip my cap to them for that.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. I mean, you watch this team throughout the month of June when they were in the midst of that tying the major league record, giving up 5 or more runs in 20 straight games. I didn't think there was any way that they were going to be where they are right now. And look, they haven't accomplished anything. I mean, this is still a team that's a game below 500.
Right. And that's why it's easy to be down on them, because deep down, they kind of suck, and you've watched them, and you've watched this pitching, but they're a better team now than they were a month and a half ago because Hellickson's going to take the ball every 5th day, and even if he halfway stinks, he's probably not going to look like a bad night with Jimenez or Tillman at this point, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. The starting pitching has been competitive for the last few weeks, really since that Cubs series to begin the second half. It's been much better. Doesn't mean it's great. Doesn't mean I expect it to be great the rest of the year. But for the most part, even games that they've lost, for the most part, their starting pitching has at least been competitive. We haven't been seeing these starts where someone's given up 5 or 6 runs in the second inning, and you look up and it's 7-1 in the third inning, where, barring a major comeback by the offense, you're out of it. So it's been better in that regard. The offense has been better. We've seen them swing the bats the way that they're more capable of doing it compared to what we saw over the first half of the season, where this was a below-average run-producing offense. So, it's been good to see that. And, it's fun to see competitive baseball. I mean, it is, and it's not great. I don't have expectations that they win the World Series this year, but at the same time, and I went back to this, I made the remark about ultimately team sports being pass-fail from a standpoint of did you win a championship or not. But at the same time, and I feel the same way about the Ravens in this regard, at the same time, if your only enjoyment in watching teams play is winning a championship, that's a heck of a lot of disappointment most of the time, and that's a heck of a lot of missed opportunity to enjoy something. I've enjoyed this Orioles run over the last 6 years. It hasn't always been perfect, certainly has been unorthodox, but you look at what they've done, and like I said, the sustained success, this is the longest period of time they've had that kind of sustained success in the last 3 decades. So, it's just something to keep in mind. It's not to change my mind. I still thought this team should have been sellers from a standpoint of trying to put themselves in better position the next few years. But at the same time, if they make the decision not to, as they did, and they end up making it to the wild card game, and in a wild card game, even playing at Yankee Stadium, that's not much more than a coin flip either way. If they win that and get into the division series, then you kind of see what happens after that, and certainly don't take that for granted, because Lord knows we sat around in this town for a long, long time seeing nothing that even approached this level of competitive baseball.
Yeah, and I've written books about it, so I'm really intimately familiar with it. And sat here on the radio for 15 years remembering August nights in Seattle in the middle of the night that don't matter. And quite frankly, 2 months ago, I felt like that would be the case. Now, that being the case, is it a little bonus or a badge? Sure, I guess, but I don't think, if the goal is to win a championship, and that is the goal, and that's what we're trying to figure out around here, because that's the thing that they haven't done, then they're not much closer to that for me, especially not a game under 500 at this point and sort of being strung along. And I inevitably, I don't think they'll play in October. I mean, if you're giving me $1 and say bet on them or against them, I'm still going to bet against them.
Sure.
But in the middle of the night in Seattle when they're beating up Giovanni Gallardo, there is something to watching them that for 15 years, dude, opening day didn't matter for 10 years around here. So having days that matter in the middle of August, I'll take it. But it's still an incredibly poorly managed place at this point, and they still have all these questions about Machado and Scope and Jones and Buck and Dan and Brock and Britton that we'll address in the offseason and into next year, and all of this will be measured in 2020 or 21 when they still haven't won the World Series. If you're not playing to win the World Series, then what are you doing, really?
Well, but the idea, it's easy to say play for the World. Well, what does that mean? I mean, Kansas City was playing for the World Series in 2014, and they hadn't even won 90 games, and all of a sudden they're in the World Series. I mean, you play to get into the postseason, and even in the NFL. I mean, Steve Bisciotti and the Ravens have talked about this. Brian Billick used to talk about this. It's great to say you're playing for a Super Bowl, but you got to get in the tournament first, and that's kind of that's the mindset from that regard. And like I said, I mean, you made the point about the Ravens and kind of where they've been and where they're likely going over the next few years. Maybe they have one or two more real shots at winning a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco as their quarterback. Maybe not. He's got to prove he can be healthy and play at a high level, and that's a question mark right now. But again, I think if you judge it solely on championships and that's all you judge it on, then you're going to be disappointed in every situation. And we've seen some of that with the Ravens post Super Bowl 47. Have they been very good since then? No. At the same time, they were still in it going into Week 17 in 2013. They made the playoffs in 2014. They were still in it on Christmas Day last year. They've only had one season where they weren't competitive whatsoever, and that was 2015. And even that season, they were close games they typically lost. Look, I'm not saying this to sugarcoat things. My point is, if it's strictly just pass-fail, win a championship or not, then 29 teams are a failure every year in Major League Baseball. 31 teams are a failure every year in the NFL. So, is there some middle ground there to acknowledge some level of success while fully understanding that it's okay to want more than that? Yeah. And we said this with the Orioles run. I wrote it. I remember sitting in a hotel room with you after the Orioles were swept in Kansas City. I thought at that point in time, then that was their last best chance to win a World Series. Now, they've made it to the playoffs once since then. Maybe they'll make it to the playoffs again this year, and maybe they win the wild card game and get to the division round. And then who knows what happens after that. Probably not looking at this team to make a deep run in October whatsoever if they get in. But it's still a matter of keeping the window open to some degree, being competitive, being relevant, and that's something that the Orioles do deserve a lot of credit for, even if they haven't made all the perfect moves along the way, that's for sure.
All right, one more late night in Seattle, and then onward and upward back home, and a trip to Fenway Park next week. And they only have one more set of dregs left on the schedule. That's the A's next week here, so we'll be monitoring that as we get into the weekend. And, of course, the Purple Birds signing yet another quarterback on Monday. Luke, you were out on the fields in Owings Mills. Quick recap of the infirmary that is Owings Mills right now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it. There's no doubt about it. I mean, first of all, they signed a quarterback, Thaddeus Lewis, a guy who's made a handful of starts in his NFL career, played at Duke. In fact, I remember covering a Duke Maryland game in College Park when he was a starting quarterback for the Blue Devils. But he was signed. I don't think this is a move any more than just to improve their preseason depth a little bit. I think anyone who saw Dustin Vaughn play on Thursday night was wildly unimpressed, and I think you saw the Ravens give him a very quick hook. It's funny because Josh Woodrum played much better than him, and Woodrum had been in camp about 10 days at that point in time. Vaughn had been with the team the entire offseason. So Thad Lewis comes in. I don't think the Ravens are going to carry three quarterbacks. If they do, would he be a candidate to be a third quarterback? Maybe. But he comes in. Marty Morningwig had some nice things to say about him. We'll see. But infirmary report, Joe Flacco remains sidelined. We know he's not playing Thursday night. We know he's not playing in the preseason. Rashad Perriman.
By the way, you guys are all funny out there. Use Rebeck, all of you, man. You see Flacco walk out, just like sneak around the corner, boom. Everybody takes a picture and it's like, there's a sighting.
It's like Bigfoot. I mean, because, and I'm not saying Joe hasn't been at the facility, but it's been rare when he's even walked outside.
Because you guys are taking pictures of him and his friggin' back hurts and he's making $25 million and he wants to get out and play football. Right?
But my point is he hasn't even been out there watching practice, and I assume it's because he's getting treatment on his back. I'm not criticizing him. It's just we haven't seen him really at all.
Probably because it hurts to stand, right?
Yeah,
Literally.
so it's just, it's been strange in that regard, but...
You ever had a backache? It sucks, man.
Oh, sure. I mean, hey, back issues are no fun for anyone. Imagine being 6'6" and 245 pounds, listed 245.
Well, imagine having the whole city waiting for a picture of you standing upright, knowing that Ryan Mallett ain't going to get it done. They all hate Joe, but they need Joe, right?
Interpreting what your posture is, interpreting how you're walking, all of that. I mean, there's plenty of that. I remember when he reported on that Wednesday before camp started, and then the news trickled out later that evening about his back. There were all kinds of people talking about it on Twitter saying, yeah, I saw a picture of Joe walking into the facility, and he looked like he was standing a little ginger. I mean, it was just funny kind of interpretation there. But, still plenty of other issues for the Ravens beyond the quarterback. Rashad Perriman still out. Quincy Adeboyjo, the rookie wide receiver, now sidelined with some kind of a knee issue.
Dude, it's like every guy you brought up last week who you thought might be good and might make the team is hurt the next week. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the Tim White injury, which a lot of people thought the Ravens were stashing. No way. They don't. You're not going to stash a guy at the beginning of the preseason. Tim White was someone they really thought was going to make the team and possibly be their return specialist. But we know he's gone for the year. The newest injury development that's concerning, Ronnie Stanley's missed a couple days now. Now, we don't know what's wrong with him. Hopefully we'll get some clarity from John Harbaugh if he's not back out on the field. But with him missing a couple practices now, you wonder what his status is for Thursday night. I mean, at some point, as much as we talk about still having time and wanting to be smart and not wanting to put guys in harm's way in the preseason, you still need to get some cohesion on your offensive line. I mean, they've had to shuffle their projected offensive line, 3 or 4 times now, with the Urschel retirement and then the Alex Lewis injury, the Austin Howard signing, now Stanley being sidelined for a couple days. Now, there's a lot of shuffling going on there, and it's great to have guys that can move around. I mean, James Hurst has kind of served a starting 3 different starting spots he's played over the last week in practices and games, but at some point you need to start building some continuity on your offensive line. And if Ronnie Stanley can't go, and depending on how much they want to push Yanda and Austin Howard, we're less than 4 weeks away from playing games for real here. So that's as much as Flacco has to be your biggest concern because he's their most important player, he's their franchise quarterback, that offensive line is, it's 1 and 1A as far as big concerns for this football team as we're getting closer and closer to the start of the season. So the offensive line still very much banged up. Good news, defensively, they continue to be in pretty good shape from a health standpoint. Most of these injuries have been on the offensive side of the ball, which we talked about at length in the offseason. They didn't do as much to the offensive side of the ball. So seems like it always finds you, right? Whether it's a few years back being light at corner and then getting hammered at that position, or wide receiver in the past, they've had injuries where they haven't had a lot of depth. And this year, just the offense in general, and specifically 3 season-ending losses on the offensive line, if you count John Urschel's retirement. That's a group that couldn't afford to have that, and the injury bug has certainly bitten that group very, very hard.
By the way, how many catches did you make? I know you played wide receiver up there at Susquehannock. How many catches did you make like Odell Beckham the other day? Be honest. 3, 4, how many?
A couple, but
on a video game,
video,
maybe.
Though, it was always when no one else was around. So,
right, it was never captured. It was like Sasquatch, not like Joe Flacco walking out to watch practice.
That say what you want about he's a quirky guy. I mean, certainly the the boat incident last year with the Giants players. I mean, that was certainly a really bad look, but this is an incredibly talented individual. I mean, we saw the amazing catch he made on Sunday Night Football against Dallas a few years back, and I mean, it looked like it was just a Velcro ball. Like I think back to, they used to have those the Velcro pads with tennis balls where you could just put your hand up and the tennis ball would stick. That's what that looked like. I mean, he just snatched it out of the air with his hand. Typically when you talk about a one-handed catch, it's a guy that cradles it, and that's a great play, by the way. I'm not taking anything away from that, but this was just snatching it with your bare hand out of thin air. I mean, it's unbelievable to watch what he does. Like I said, he's quirky. There are things about him that you maybe don't love as far as focus and things of that nature, but boy, is he an incredible talent. And I'm trying to think about this. I've always thought, just from a pure talent standpoint, even though he wasn't the best receiver of all time, I think Randy Moss, you can make an argument, the most talented receiver in the history of the league. Beckham is not far off in that department. Where he ultimately will rank, he's got to produce, he's got to win, he's got to do it for a long, long time. But if you're just talking about sheer physical gifts, he's right up there with any of the all-time greats from a talent standpoint.
Yeah, too bad we don't have like a Harlem Globetrotters in football, because that
I know, right?
The trick shot.
He could do that for years and years. He'd be the Meadowlark Lemon of Globetrotter football.
Yeah, well, it makes for nice August video footage, but we don't have to see them this year, and he won't beat us in the fourth quarter like he did last year. He is Luke Jones, Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. He's in Owings Mills. The Ravens are headed to Miami. The Orioles are keeping us up late. There'll be an afternoon game on Wednesday, then a down day as we watch some fake football from the Hard Rock Stadium on Thursday. I got you covered all week out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault, 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. You can listen to what you want, when you want. Boy, we've done a lot this week. Had a lot of conversations, football, baseball. I've done some Caps and some Wizards in there, some Dunbar residue off the 30-30 last week. It's all out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. If you're going to London, we'd love to have you at our party. We're doing a Purple Sky takeover on the Saturday before the game on the 23rd over there against the Jaguars. And you can find me Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. If you're subscribed to our WNST text service, you know how good it is. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Luke will be getting the news out to you as we head to Miami this week. And, got to get Flacco back out on the field. I can't take a bad football season after the year I've had. I need to be 2-0 when we land in London. That's my goal. That would make for a good year. 2-0 when we land in London, and my God, if we get beaten by the Jaguars and I have to fly home across the Atlantic Ocean after that. I don't know how I would respond to that on Steeler Week, but we're going to try. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports